The wooden platform creaked beneath Katherine Wright's bare feet as rough hands shoved her forward into the bitter December wind. And she knew with absolute certainty that this was the day she would either die or discover what it truly meant to survive. The year was 1878, and Florissant, Colorado sat nestled in the mountains like a secret waiting to be uncovered. Katherine had heard stories of this mining town, of how prospectors came seeking silver and left with either fortunes or graves. She never imagined she would arrive here as cargo, her wrists bound with hemp rope that had rubbed her skin raw during the 3-day journey from Denver. "Lot 17, the auctioneer barked, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "Young woman, healthy, can cook and clean. Indentured contract, 5 years remaining." Katherine lifted her chin despite the humiliation burning through her chest. The crowd before her consisted mainly of miners, their faces weathered and hard, their eyes calculating as they assessed her worth like she was a horse or a piece of equipment. She wore only a thin cotton dress, inadequate for the mountain cold, and her dark hair hung in tangled waves past her shoulders. At 22 years old, she had imagined many possible futures for herself, but never this. The circumstances that led her to this platform were a familiar story in the aftermath of the financial panic that had gripped the nation. Her father's debts, his sudden death, and the cruel discovery that he had signed papers she never knew existed. Papers that made her responsible for thousands of dollars she could never repay. The men who held those papers had given her a choice that was not really a choice at all: prison or indentured servitude. She had chosen what she thought was survival. "Starting bid $50, the auctioneer announced. A man in the front raised his hand immediately. Katherine recognized the type, had seen too many like him in Denver. His eyes held a predatory gleam that made her stomach turn. "50 to Mr. Garrison. Do I hear 60? Another hand rose, then another. Katherine watched her value increase in $10 increments while snow began to fall in delicate flakes that caught in her eyelashes. She wondered if this was how Livestock felt at market, aware of their fate but powerless to change it. $100, a new voice called out, deep and steady. Katherine's eyes found the speaker near the back of the crowd. He was tall, perhaps in his late 20s, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that spoke of long days under the sun. Unlike many of the men present, he was clean-shaven, and he wore a sheepskin coat that looked warm enough to sleep in. Something about his eyes, green as summer grass, made her breath catch. They held neither the calculating coldness of the other bidders nor pity that would have been equally unbearable. Instead, they held something that looked almost like recognition, though she knew they had never met. 100 to the gentleman in back, the auctioneer said with renewed enthusiasm. Do I hear 120? 120, Mr. Garrison countered, his voice sharp with irritation. The tall man did not hesitate. 150. A murmur rippled through the crowd. That was a significant sum, more than many miners earned in 2 months of backbreaking work. Katherine's heart began to pound for reasons she could not fully name. She told herself it did not matter who bought her contract. 5 years of servitude would be 5 years regardless of the master. But something in her core rebelled against that logic, insisting that it mattered very much indeed. 150, the auctioneer repeated. Mr. Garrison, do you counter? Garrison studied the tall man with narrowed eyes, seeming to weigh his options. Finally, he shook his head and turned away, muttering something under his breath that Katherine was grateful she could not hear. Going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Preston Young for $150. Preston Young. Katherine repeated the name silently, trying it out, wondering what kind of man would spend such money on a stranger's servitude contract. He approached the platform with steady strides, reaching into his coat for a leather wallet that looked worn but well-maintained. The auctioneer counted the bills with practiced efficiency while Preston's eyes met Catherine's once more. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Your feet look half frozen." The kindness in his tone nearly undid her. She had steeled herself for cruelty or indifference, had built walls around her heart that kindness threatened to breach. "Yes," she managed, though in truth, she could barely feel her toes. Preston removed his coat without ceremony and draped it around her shoulders. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming, carrying the scent of leather and pine and something indefinably masculine. "Let me see your hands," he said. She extended her bound wrists, and he produced a knife from his belt. Katherine flinched instinctively, but he simply cut through the rope with a single smooth motion, his fingers brushing against her abraded skin with surprising gentleness. "You are bleeding," he observed, examining the rope burns. "We will need to get those cleaned and bandaged." "I am fine," Katherine said automatically, then wondered why she was arguing. What did it matter if she showed weakness now, nevertheless? Preston turned to the auctioneer. "Where are her belongings?" "Got nothing but the dress she is wearing," the man replied, already moving on to the next lot, a collection of mining tools. Preston nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. He gestured toward the edge of the crowd. "My horse is this way. There is a doctor in town who can tend to your wrists, and then we will get you some proper clothing and a hot meal. After that, we need to have a conversation about your circumstances." Katherine found herself following him, her mind struggling to process the sudden shift in her situation. They navigated through the dispersing crowd until they reached a hitching post where a beautiful bay mare stood waiting, her breath steaming in the cold air. "This is Rosie," Preston said, running a hand along the horse's neck with obvious affection. "She is steady and will not spook easily." "Have you ridden before?" "Not often," Katherine admitted. "In Denver, her family had owned a carriage but never horses for riding." "You will be in front of me then. I will keep you steady." Preston mounted in one fluid motion, then extended his hand down to her. "Put your foot on mine and I will pull you up." Katherine hesitated for only a moment before complying. His hand was strong and calloused from work, and he lifted her as if she weighed nothing, settling her on the saddle in front of him. His arms came around her to grip the reins, and suddenly she was surrounded by warmth and the solid presence of him. It was far too intimate for people who had just met, but she found she did not mind as much as she thought she should. They rode through Florissant at an easy pace, and Katherine took in her new surroundings with searching eyes. The town was smaller than Denver but bustling with activity. False-fronted buildings lined the main street, their painted signs advertising everything from dry goods to legal services. Men moved with purpose between the shops and saloons, while a few women in heavy cloaks hurried along the wooden boardwalks. Beyond the town, mountains rose in majestic peaks, their tops white with snow that glittered in the weak winter sunlight. "It is more active than I expected," Katherine said, surprising herself by speaking first. "Silver brings people," Preston replied from behind her, "and people bring commerce. The town has grown considerably in the past 2 years. There is even talk of a proper school being built come spring." His voice held no judgment, just simple statement of fact. Katherine found herself relaxing incrementally against him, though whether it was from exhaustion, cold, or something else entirely, she could not say. They stopped in front of a small building with a sign reading Dr. Mitchell, physician. Preston dismounted first, then helped Katherine down with the same easy strength he had shown before. Her legs trembled when they took her weight, and his hands remained at her waist until he was certain she was steady. "Can you manage the steps?" he asked. Yes. Katherine moved forward before he could offer more assistance, needing to prove to herself that she still had some measure of capability and control. The doctor's office was warm, heated by a pot-bellied stove in the corner. An older man with spectacles and thinning gray hair looked up from a desk cluttered with papers and medical texts. "Preston," he greeted with obvious familiarity. "What brings you to town on auction day? I figured you would be staying clear of that madness." "The auction is exactly why I am here," Preston said, guiding Katherine forward with a light hand at her back. "This is Miss Katherine Wright. She needs her wrists tended to and a general examination to ensure she has not taken ill from exposure. Doctor." Mitchell's expression shifted from friendly to professional in an instant. He stood and gestured to an examination table. "Miss Wright, please have a seat. Let me see what we are dealing with." Katherine sat and extended her wrists. The doctor examined them with gentle fingers, making small sounds of disapproval. "Rope burns fairly severe. They have been binding you tightly." "For 3 days," Katherine confirmed quietly. "Criminal," Dr. Mitchell muttered, reaching for supplies from a cabinet. "Absolutely criminal what they call legal these days." While the doctor worked, cleaning the wounds with something that stung terribly, Preston stood near the window, giving her space but not leaving entirely. Katherine appreciated this more than she could express. She watched him from the corner of her eye, noting the way he carried himself with quiet confidence, the way his jaw tightened when she could not quite suppress a wince at the doctor's ministrations. "There," Dr. Mitchell said finally, securing bandages around both her wrists. "Keep these clean and dry. Change the dressings daily. If you notice any increasing redness or if the wounds begin to weep, come back immediately." "Thank you," Katherine said. "Now let me listen to your lungs." The doctor produced a wooden stethoscope. "That dress is woefully inadequate for this climate. How long were you exposed?" "They kept us in a wagon, but it was not covered. Since dawn this morning and the journey here." Dr. Mitchell pressed the stethoscope to her back, instructing her to breathe deeply. After a thorough examination, he stepped back with a nod. "Your lungs are clear, which is fortunate, but you are on the edge of hypothermia. You need warm food, warm clothing, and several hours by a good fire." "I will see to it," Preston said, moving forward with a handful of bills. "What do I owe you?" $2 will cover it." Dr. Mitchell accepted the payment, then looked at Katherine with kind eyes. "You are in good hands, Miss Wright. Preston here is one of the few genuinely decent men I have had the pleasure of knowing in this territory." Katherine did not know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded. Preston helped her down from the examination table, his coat still around her shoulders, and led her back outside to where Rosie waited patiently. Their next stop was the general store, a spacious building that smelled of coffee and sawdust. A woman behind the counter looked up with interest as they entered, her sharp eyes taking in every detail from Preston's protective stance to Katherine's bandaged wrists. "Afternoon, Preston," the woman said. "What can I do for you?" "Mrs. Cooper, this is Miss Katherine Wright. She needs a complete set of winter clothing, undergarments included, plus a sturdy pair of boots. Also a hairbrush, soap, and any other necessities you think a woman requires." Mrs. Cooper's expression softened. "I see. Come with me, dear. Let us get you properly outfitted." For the next 30 minutes, Katherine was measured, fitted, and dressed in warm wool garments that felt like heaven against her frozen skin. Mrs. Cooper was brusque but efficient, her hands gentle as she helped Katherine into flannel undergarments, a sturdy calico dress, a heavy wool coat, and lined leather boots that actually fit. There were also stockings, gloves, a scarf, and a proper bonnet. "You look human again, Mrs. Cooper declared with satisfaction, stepping back to assess her work. That other dress should be burned. Agreed, Katherine said, and was surprised to hear a hint of amusement in her own voice. When they emerged from the back room, Preston was waiting with several parcels already wrapped and tied. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, and something in his expression made Katherine's cheeks warm. "Much better," he said quietly. "You have color in your face again, Mrs." Cooper tallied the purchases with quick efficiency. "That will be $32 total, Preston." He paid without hesitation, gathering the parcels. Katherine watched the transaction with growing unease. The amount of money he had spent on her in just the past hour was staggering. Added to what he had paid for her contract, he had invested well over $180 in someone he did not even know. "Why are you doing this?" she asked once they were back outside, unable to contain the question any longer. Preston secured the parcels to Rosie's saddle before answering. He turned to face her fully, his green eyes serious. "Because no human being should be sold like livestock. Because what is happening with these debt contracts is legal robbery. And because I have the means to help, and so I should." "You do not even know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know what it is like to be powerless. I know what it is like to need help that does not come." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I am not expecting gratitude or servitude, Katherine. I bought your contract, yes, but only so that I could give you a choice about what happens next. After we eat and you are thoroughly warm, we will discuss your options." Katherine stared at him, trying to reconcile this man with everything she had learned about human nature in recent months. "I do not understand." "You will," Preston said simply. "But first, food. There is a restaurant 2 buildings down that serves the best stew in Colorado, and I am told you need warm meals." The restaurant was small but clean, with red-checked curtains and tables that showed signs of careful maintenance. The proprietor, a stout man with a magnificent mustache, greeted Preston like an old friend and showed them to a corner table that offered some privacy from the handful of other diners. Hot stew arrived quickly, along with fresh bread and butter. Katherine had not realized how hungry she was until the first bite hit her tongue. She had to force herself to eat slowly, to not give in to the urge to devour everything in front of her like an animal. Preston ate his own meal at a measured pace, not watching her directly but somehow still aware of her every movement. When her bowl was empty, he signaled for another serving without comment. The second bowl disappeared almost as quickly as the first. Finally, with warm food in her belly and dressed in proper clothing, Katherine felt almost human again. The exhaustion was still there, bone deep and insistent, but the immediate desperation had faded. "Better?" Preston asked. "Much, thank you." Katherine folded her hands in her lap, acutely aware of the bandages under her new gloves. "You said we needed to talk about my options." "I did." Preston leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Here is the situation as I understand it. You owe a debt that resulted in a 5-year indenture contract. That contract is now in my possession. I have 3 options for what I do with it, and you should understand all 3 before we proceed." Katherine nodded, her heart beginning to pound again. "Option 1. I keep the contract and you work for me, as was the original intent of the auction. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. It is small but growing, and I could certainly use help with the household tasks and eventually with the livestock. I would provide room and board, and I would treat you fairly and with respect. At the end of 5 years, the contract would be fulfilled and you would be free." He paused, and Katherine waited, sensing there was more. "Option 2. I tear up the contract right now and you are immediately free. I would help you find employment in town and a place to stay until you have established yourself. You would owe me nothing, and we would part as acquaintances." "What is option 3?" Katherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Preston met her eyes steadily. "Option 3 is that you work for me for a shorter period of time, let us say 1 year. During that year, I teach you the skills you would need to make a living out here, whether that is ranching, keeping accounts, or something else entirely. At the end of the year, you would be free, and you would have the knowledge and connections to build your own life. I would also provide a small wage that you could save." Katherine processed this slowly, turning each option over in her mind. "Why would you offer option 3? "It gives you less for your investment." "Because 5 years is a long time to feel beholden to someone," Preston said quietly. "And because I think you are the kind of person who wants to earn her freedom, not simply be given it. Am I wrong?" He was not wrong. Katherine felt the truth of his words in her bones. She did want to earn it, wanted to prove to herself and the world that she was not a victim but a survivor capable of determining her own fate. "I want option 3, she said firmly. 1 year. And I will work harder than any employee you have ever had." Something that might have been approval flickered across Preston's face. "Then we have an agreement. I will draw up a new contract tomorrow that spells out the terms clearly. You will have your own room in the ranch house, 3 meals a day and $10 a month wage. In return, you will help with cooking, cleaning, and whatever other tasks need doing. You will also learn everything I can teach you about running a ranch. Does that sound fair?" "More than fair," Katherine said, and meant it with her whole heart. Preston extended his hand across the table. "Welcome to the Silver Pine Ranch, Katherine Wright." She placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. It was a handshake between equals, between partners entering into a business arrangement. But Katherine could not ignore the way her pulse quickened at the contact, or the way Preston's eyes seemed to hold a warmth that went beyond mere employer courtesy. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and then Preston paid the bill and led her back to where Rosie waited. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that were almost too beautiful to bear. "It is about an hour's ride to the ranch," Preston said as he helped her mount. "Are you too tired?" "I can manage," Katherine assured him, though truthfully she was exhausted. But she wanted to see her new home, wanted to begin this new chapter of her life while the hope of it was still fresh in her chest. They rode out of Florissant as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The road was well traveled, winding through pine forests that stood like silent sentinels in the gathering darkness. Katherine found herself relaxing into Preston's steady presence behind her, lulled by the rhythm of Rosie's gait and the warmth of the body at her back. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, wanting to break the silence. "I have had it for 3 years," Preston replied, his voice rumbling pleasantly near her ear. "It is 160 acres, most of it grazing land. I have a small herd of cattle, about 40 head currently, and I am building it up slowly. There are chickens, 2 milk cows, and a pair of barn cats who think they own the place. The house is modest, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a main room. There is also a barn, a chicken coop, and a root cellar." "It sounds wonderful," Katherine said honestly. After the cramped rooms she had occupied in Denver, even a modest house sounded like paradise. "It is home," Preston said simply. "I grew up on a ranch in Texas, worked cattle drives for years to save money. When I heard about the land grants up here, I decided it was time to build something of my own." "Do you have family back in Texas?" There was a long pause before Preston answered. "I did. My parents died when I was 16, cholera. My younger sister passed a year later from the same. After that, it was just me." "I am sorry," Katherine said softly, understanding loss intimately. "Thank you. What about you? The auctioneer mentioned your father's debts." Katherine took a deep breath, letting the story out in carefully measured words. My mother died when I was young. My father raised me, and I thought we had a comfortable life. He was a banker, well respected in Denver. But after the panic, everything fell apart. He had invested heavily in ventures that failed. He took out loans, forged papers, made increasingly desperate choices. She paused, swallowing against the tightness in her throat. He shot himself in his office 6 months ago. I found him. Preston's arms tightened slightly around her, a gesture of comfort. That is a burden no one should have to carry. The men he owed came for me the same day. They had papers, legitimate papers that made me responsible for his debts. They said I could go to prison for fraud since my name was on some of the documents, even though I never signed anything myself, or I could work off the debt through indenture. Katherine laughed bitterly. They made it sound like they were doing me a favor. They are predators, Preston said flatly. They target people at their most vulnerable and call it legal business. You understand it well. I have seen it before, too many times. Preston guided Rosie around a bend in the road, and suddenly a valley opened up before them, bathed in moonlight. We are here. The Silver Pine Ranch sat nestled against a hillside, sheltered by a stand of towering pines that gave the property its name. The house was indeed modest, a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney from which smoke curled invitingly. The barn was larger than the house, well-maintained and solid-looking. Everything spoke of careful stewardship and honest work. It is beautiful, Katherine breathed. It is yours as much as mine for the next year, Preston said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. They dismounted in front of the barn, and Preston insisted on showing Katherine the house before tending to Rosie. The interior was spare but clean, furnished with handmade pieces that showed skill if not artistry. The kitchen had a good stove, a sturdy table, and shelves lined with supplies. The main room held a fireplace, 2 comfortable-looking chairs, and a small bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes. The bedroom on the left is yours, Preston said, gesturing down a short hallway. It has a bed, a chest for your things, and a small writing desk. Nothing fancy, but it is private and the roof does not leak. Katherine moved to the doorway and looked in. The room was simple but spotless, with a quilt on the bed that looked handmade and a window that would offer a view of the mountains come morning. To her, it looked like sanctuary. It is perfect, she said, turning back to Preston. Thank you for all of this. I know I keep saying it, but I do not have other words. You do not need other words. Preston met her gaze, and something electric passed between them in the quiet house. He cleared his throat and stepped back. I need to tend to Rosie and check on the other animals. There is water in the pitcher for washing, and you should find everything you need in the kitchen if you want tea or anything else. Make yourself at home. He left before Katherine could respond, the door closing softly behind him. She stood alone in the house that was to be her home, listening to the pop of the fire in the main room and the whisper of wind through the pines outside. Slowly, the reality of her situation began to settle over her like a blanket. This morning, she had been property, bound and cold and terrified. Now she was standing in a warm house, dressed in proper clothing, with a year of honest work ahead of her and freedom waiting at the end of it. And all because a stranger with kind green eyes had decided to intervene. Katherine moved to her new bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, testing the mattress. It was filled with straw but topped with enough blankets to make it comfortable. She removed her coat and gloves carefully, wincing at the pull on her bandaged wrists, and then simply sat for a moment, breathing. She would not cry. There had been enough tears over the past months to last a lifetime. Instead, she would be grateful. She would work hard. She would learn everything Preston Young could teach her. and she would build a new life from the ashes of the old one. When Preston returned from the barn, Katherine was in the kitchen, investigating the supplies and trying to figure out what to make for breakfast the next morning. He stamped snow from his boots at the door and hung his hat on a peg. "You should rest," he said, noting her activity. "You have had an exhausting day." "So have you," Katherine pointed out. "And you rode out before dawn to make it to Florissant for the auction." "True enough." Preston moved to the stove, stoking the fire and adding wood. "But I am accustomed to long days. You are recovering from exposure and trauma." "I am also accustomed to making myself useful," Katherine countered. "What time do you usually eat breakfast?" Preston studied her for a moment, then seemed to accept that arguing would be futile. "Dawn or shortly after. I need to feed the animals and do some other morning chores first. If you wanted to have something ready by the time I come back in, I certainly would not object." "Then that is what I will do." Katherine turned back to the shelves, taking mental inventory. "Is there anything you particularly like or dislike?" "I am not particular. Whatever you make will be appreciated." They continued in this vein for a few more minutes, establishing a rhythm that felt almost domestic. Eventually, Preston yawned despite his best efforts to hide it, and Katherine shooed him toward his own bedroom with more authority than she probably had any right to claim. "Rest, Mr. Young. I will see you in the morning." "Preston," he corrected gently. "Just Preston. We are partners now, not master and servant." "Preston then," Katherine agreed, testing out the informality. "And you should call me Katherine." He nodded, then paused in his doorway. "I am glad you are here, Katherine. I know the circumstances are not what anyone would choose, but I am glad nonetheless." Before she could formulate a response, he was gone, his door closing softly. Katherine stood in the quiet kitchen, her heart doing strange things in her chest, and wondered what exactly she had gotten herself into. Sleep came easily that night, her body surrendering to exhaustion the moment she lay down. Katherine woke before dawn, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory returned, and with it a sense of purpose she had not felt in months. She dressed quickly in the dim light, braided her hair in a practical plait, and made her way to the kitchen. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers, but she coaxed it back to life and set about making breakfast. She found eggs, bacon, flour for biscuits, and coffee. By the time she heard Preston moving around, the kitchen was filled with appetizing smells. He emerged looking slightly disheveled, his hair damp as if he had dunked his head in the wash basin. "You are up early," he observed. "Habit," Katherine said, flipping bacon in the skillet. "My father expected breakfast at dawn, and I have never been able to break myself of the routine." "I am not complaining." Preston poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her work with open appreciation. "You know your way around a kitchen." "I have been cooking since I was 12. It is one of the few practical skills I possess." "I doubt that is true, but we will have time to discover what other talents you have." Preston sipped his coffee, then set down the mug. "I should get to the morning chores. I will be back in about 30 minutes. Breakfast will be ready." True to his word, Preston returned just as Katherine was plating the food. They sat down together at the kitchen table, and for a few minutes, the only sounds were those of eating and the quiet crackle of the fire. "This is excellent," Preston said after clearing half his plate. "Best breakfast I have had in months." Katherine felt absurdly pleased by the praise. "Thank you. I was worried the biscuits might not rise properly. I am still learning your stove. They are perfect." Preston reached for another one, slathering it with butter. "So I thought we could spend today getting you properly oriented. I will show you around the ranch, introduce you to the animals, explain the routines. Tomorrow we can start the actual work." "That sounds reasonable," Katherine agreed. Though I should warn you, I know very little about livestock. I have lived in cities my entire life. Everyone starts somewhere. I will teach you what you need to know. After breakfast, Preston led Katherine on a tour of the property. They started with the barn, a solid structure that smelled of hay and animals. The two milk cows, Daisy and Clover, regarded Katherine with placid brown eyes. The barn cats, which Preston had not named because they were nominally working animals, wound around her ankles with shameless affection. They are terrible mousers, Preston admitted, scratching one behind the ears. But they are good company, so I keep them around. The chickens were next, a flock of 24 hens and one rooster who ruled his domain with an iron beak. Katherine learned how to collect eggs, how to check for broodiness, and how much feed to scatter each morning and evening. The cattle were in a far pasture, dark shapes against the white snow. Preston explained his breeding program, his plans for expansion, the challenges of ranching in mountain country where winters were harsh and predators numerous. It is not an easy life, he said honestly, but it is a good one. There is something satisfying about building something with your own hands, about being accountable only to yourself and the land. Katherine understood that sentiment more than he could know. I think I would like to learn about the cattle, she said. Not just cooking and cleaning, but the actual ranching. Preston looked at her with surprise and what might have been respect. Most women have no interest in the livestock side of things. I am not most women, Katherine said firmly. And if I am going to make a life out here, I need to know all of it, not just the domestic parts. A slow smile spread across Preston's face. Then I will teach you all of it. Fair warning, though, it involves mud, manure, and occasionally being kicked by animals who do not appreciate your help. I can handle it. I believe you can. They spent the rest of the day in this fashion, Preston explaining and Katherine absorbing information like a sponge. She learned about water rights, grazing rotation, predator management, and 100 other details that went into running a successful ranch. By the time the sun began to set, her head was spinning with new knowledge and her feet were sore from walking, but she felt more alive than she had in months. That night, they ate dinner together at the kitchen table and Katherine asked questions while Preston answered them with seemingly endless patience. She learned that he was 27 years old, that he had driven cattle from Texas to Kansas 3 times, that he had been shot once during a robbery attempt, and still carried the bullet in his shoulder because it was too risky to remove. She learned that he read voraciously, everything from agricultural journals to poetry, and that he had opinions about everything from politics to proper fence construction. In turn, she shared her own story in greater detail. Her childhood in Denver, the private tutors her father had insisted upon, her love of music and literature. The slow realization as she grew older that her father was not the upstanding man she had believed him to be. The devastating aftermath of his death and the cruel efficiency with which the creditors had dismantled her life. They took everything, she said quietly, staring into her tea. The house, the furniture, every piece of jewelry my mother had left me. They said it all had to go toward the debt. And when it still was not enough, they took me. Preston's jaw tightened. I wish I could say that was unusual, but I would be lying. There is a whole industry built on preying on the desperate. You saved me from it, Katherine said, meeting his eyes. I do not think I have properly expressed what that means to me. You gave me back my future. You would have survived either way, Preston said with conviction. You are stronger than you think, Katherine Wright. I just gave you a better option. But Katherine was not so sure. She had felt herself fracturing on that platform, had felt her spirit beginning to break under the weight of humiliation and helplessness. Preston had not just bought her contract. He had restored her humanity. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Katherine rose before dawn, made breakfast, and spent the mornings learning domestic ranch tasks, making cheese, preserving food, managing supplies. The afternoons were devoted to learning the outdoor work, feeding animals, basic veterinary care, fence repair, and gradually, working with the cattle themselves. Preston was a patient teacher, never condescending, always willing to explain something a second or third time. He showed her how to approach a nervous cow, how to read animal body language, how to throw a lasso with reasonable accuracy. When she made mistakes, which was often at first, he simply helped her understand what went wrong and how to do better next time. But beyond the teaching, there was something else growing between them. Katherine first noticed it in small moments. The way Preston's hand would linger at her elbow when helping her over rough ground, the way his eyes tracked her movements when he thought she was not paying attention, the way his smile came more easily with each passing day. She found herself equally affected. She noticed the strength in his shoulders when he lifted hay bales, the gentleness of his hands when he tended to a sick calf, the way his voice softened when he said her name. She caught herself watching him more often than was strictly appropriate, memorizing the planes of his face and the way he moved through the world with quiet confidence. It was dangerous territory, this growing attraction. They had a business arrangement, and Katherine needed the skills and the freedom that arrangement would provide. Complicating it with romantic feelings seemed foolish at best and disastrous at worst. But the heart, Katherine was learning, did not particularly care about what was wise or practical. One evening in late January, nearly 6 weeks after her arrival at the Silver Pine Ranch, a winter storm rolled in with startling ferocity. Katherine had been in the barn collecting eggs when the first flakes began to fall. Within minutes, the snow was coming down so thick she could barely see the house. "Leave the eggs," Preston called from the barn door, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "We need to get inside now." They ran for the house, Preston's arm around Katherine's shoulders to keep her from being blown off course. By the time they stumbled through the door, they were both covered in snow and breathing hard. "That came up fast," Katherine gasped, shaking snow from her coat. "Mountain storms are like that sometimes." Preston moved to the window, peering out at the whiteout conditions. "We are going to be trapped inside for at least a day, maybe more. Good thing we have plenty of supplies." The storm raged for 3 days. The world outside the windows became nothing but a wall of white, the wind screaming like something alive. Katherine and Preston were confined to the house, and the forced proximity brought a new intensity to their interaction. They played cards by the fire, read aloud from Preston's collection of books, cooked elaborate meals because there was nothing else to do with the time. And they talked, long conversations that ranged from the philosophical to the mundane, learning each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. On the second night, Katherine found herself curled in one of the chairs by the fire while Preston occupied the other. They had been reading, but both had set their books aside, content to simply watch the flames dance. "Can I ask you something?" Katherine said softly. "Always. Why did you really come to that auction? You said you have been to town on auction days before, but you never participated. What made this time different?" Preston was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the fire. "About a year ago, I went into town for supplies. There was an auction happening, just like the one where I met you. They were selling contracts, calling it legal and proper. I watched a girl, could not have been more than 16, get bought by a mine owner I knew was cruel. I watched her face as she realized what was happening to her, and I did nothing." His voice was rough with old guilt. "I told myself it was not my business, that I could not save everyone, that I had my own concerns, but I could not forget her face." He looked up at Katherine then, his eyes haunted. "I heard later that she died. Overwork, exposure, an accident at the mine, the stories varied. But she died and I had done nothing. So I swore that the next time I would act. When I heard there was another auction, I went with money in my pocket and a promise to myself that I would not stand by again." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "You saved me to atone for her." "No," Preston said firmly. "I saved you because you deserved saving, because she deserved saving, and I failed her, but I would not fail again. There is a difference." Katherine set aside her book and moved from her chair to kneel beside his, placing her hand over his. "Thank you for telling me. And for what it is worth, I think you have more than made amends." Preston turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers. The gesture was intimate, speaking of things neither of them had put into words. "You have become important to me, Katherine, more than just an employee or a project. I need you to know that." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "You have become important to me too. I think you know that." "I hoped," Preston admitted, "but I did not want to presume. We have an arrangement, and I do not want you to feel pressured or obligated in any way beyond what we agreed upon." Katherine moved closer, emboldened by the vulnerability in his eyes. "What if I want more than what we agreed upon? What if I feel more than what we agreed upon, Katherine?" Her name was almost a prayer on his lips. "I am not imagining this, am I?" she whispered. "This thing between us." "No," Preston said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "You are not imagining it. I have been feeling it since the day I saw you on that platform. I looked at you and something just knew. I cannot explain it better than that." "You do not need to explain it. I felt it too." Katherine took a shaky breath, gathering her courage. "I know this is complicated. I know we should probably maintain professional boundaries. But I am terrible at denying what I want, and I want you, Preston Young. I want to explore this connection. I want to see where it leads." For answer, Preston cupped her face in his free hand, his touch infinitely gentle. "Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there is no going back to the way things were." "I am sure," Katherine said, and she had never been more certain of anything in her life. Preston kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of restrained passion. Katherine melted into him, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, then his hair. The kiss deepened, and the world fell away until there was nothing but the two of them and the warmth of the fire, and the feeling that she had finally come home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I am absolutely going to fall in love with you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If I have not already." "Good," Katherine whispered back, "because I am already halfway there myself." They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the firelight while the storm raged outside. Eventually they moved to the larger chair, Katherine tucked against Preston's side, his arm around her shoulders. They did not talk much, did not need to. The silence was comfortable, full of promise and possibility. When the storm finally broke on the fourth day, the world emerged transformed. Snow lay thick and pristine over everything, glittering in the sunlight like scattered diamonds. Preston had to dig a path to the barn, and they spent hours checking on the animals, making sure everyone had survived the storm unscathed. But everything had changed between them, and both knew it. They moved around each other with new awareness, finding excuses to touch, sharing smiles that held entire conversations. The work continued as before, but now it was punctuated with stolen kisses and quiet moments of connection. Katherine found herself happier than she had been in years, perhaps ever. The weight of her past began to lift, replaced by hope for the future. She was learning and growing, discovering strengths she had not known she possessed. And she was falling in love with a man who treated her like an equal, who valued her mind as much as her domestic skills, who made her feel seen and cherished. February brought more snow, and March came in like a lion with winds that rattled the house and made outdoor work a challenge. But Katherine and Preston weathered it together, their bond growing stronger with each shared difficulty. He taught her to ride properly, to shoot a rifle, to predict weather by reading the sky. She taught him to cook more than just basic sustenance, to appreciate poetry, to laugh more freely. By April, when the snow began to melt and the first green shoots appeared, Katherine could hardly remember the frightened woman who had stood on that auction platform. She had been forged anew in this wild place, shaped by honest work and genuine affection into someone stronger and more capable. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose, Preston took her hand in his. "We need to talk about the contract," he said quietly. Katherine's stomach clenched. She had been so happy that she had almost forgotten about the timeline of their arrangement. 4 months had passed, which meant there were only 8 months remaining before her year of service was complete. "What about it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Preston turned to face her, his expression serious. "I want to tear it up, not because I want you to leave, but because I do not want this between us anymore. I do not want you staying because of an obligation. I want you staying because you want to be here, with me." Relief and joy flooded through Katherine in equal measure. "I do want to be here. I cannot imagine being anywhere else." "Then let me court you properly," Preston said, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. "No contracts, no obligations. Just 2 people who care about each other, seeing where this leads." "Yes," Katherine breathed. "Yes, I want that." Preston produced a folded paper from his pocket, the contract they had drawn up that first day. Without ceremony, he tore it in half, then quarters, then smaller pieces still. The fragments scattered on the porch like snow. "You are free," he said simply. "Completely and totally free." Katherine laughed, the sound bright with happiness. "And I choose to stay, I choose you." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Katherine knew with absolute certainty that this was the beginning of something permanent. The spring brought new life to the Silver Pine Ranch. Calves were born, and Katherine was there for every birth, learning how to assist when necessary and when to let nature take its course. The garden they planted together began to sprout, neat rows of vegetables that would feed them through the next winter. The days grew longer and warmer, and the mountains shed their white mantles to reveal gray stone and green forest. Preston courted Katherine with old-fashioned sweetness, bringing her wildflowers and leaving notes tucked into her books. They took long rides together in the evenings, exploring the ranch and the wild lands beyond. He held her hand during thunderstorms and listened with genuine interest when she talked about the books she was reading. He valued her opinions on ranch business, consulting her on decisions about livestock purchases and land improvements. For her part, Katherine showed her affection in the care she took with the home they shared, in the meals she prepared with love, in the way she supported his dreams and contributed her own ideas for the future. She learned to anticipate his moods, to know when he needed space and when he needed company. She marveled daily at how perfectly they fit together, how naturally they had become partners in all things. By June, they were inseparable, and it surprised no one in Florissant when Preston began making trips to town to speak with the circuit judge about marriage requirements. "People are talking," Katherine mentioned one evening as they worked together to repair a section of fence. "Let them talk," Preston said, hammering a nail with more force than strictly necessary. "Unless it bothers you, no," Katherine said honestly. "I do not care what people say. I only care about what we are building here." Preston set down his hammer and pulled her close, kissing her soundly despite the fact that they were visible from the road. "What we are building is a life together, and I want to make it official." Catherine's heart soared. "Is that a proposal, Preston Young?" "Not yet," he said with a grin. "When I propose, you will know it. There will be romance and possibly terrible poetry. I am planning it out." "I look forward to it," Katherine said, laughing against his chest. The proposal came in July, on a warm evening with fireflies dancing in the meadow behind the house. Preston had arranged a picnic, complete with Catherine's favorite foods and a bottle of wine he had been saving for a special occasion. They ate as the sun set, talking and laughing as they always did. When full darkness fell and the stars emerged in their millions, Preston stood and offered Katherine his hand. He led her to the center of the meadow, surrounded by the gentle glow of fireflies, and dropped to one knee. "Katherine Wright," he began, and his voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I am not a poet, and I am not a man of fancy words. But I am a man who knows his own heart, and my heart belongs to you completely. You have made my house a home. You have made my life an adventure. You have made me believe in possibilities I had stopped imagining. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life loving you, supporting you, and building dreams with you. Will you marry me?" He produced a ring, simple gold with a small diamond that caught the starlight. Katherine recognized it as something that must have cost him dearly, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, absolutely yes." Preston slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, they kissed under the stars with fireflies as witnesses, and Katherine thought she might burst from the sheer happiness of it all. They were married in August in the small church in Florissant, with half the town in attendance. Katherine wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Cooper had helped her select, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Preston wore his best suit, and his eyes never left Catherine's face throughout the entire ceremony. Dr. Mitchell stood as Preston's witness, and Mrs. Cooper stood as Catherine's. The circuit preacher who rode through the mountains performing marriages and baptisms spoke eloquently about love and commitment, about two souls joining to become stronger together than they ever could be apart. When Preston kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in applause, and Katherine felt like her heart might actually take flight. The reception was held at the largest restaurant in Florissant, with food and dancing and genuine warmth from people who had watched their courtship with approval. Katherine danced with Preston until her feet ached, then danced some more, reluctant to let the magic of the day end. Late that night, they rode back to the Silver Pine Ranch under a moon so bright it cast shadows. Preston carried Katherine over the threshold of the house that was now legally theirs together, and they spent their wedding night discovering new depths of love and intimacy. In the morning, Katherine woke wrapped in her husband's arms, the word still so new and wonderful that she repeated it silently to herself. Husband. Preston was her husband. She was his wife. They had built something real and lasting from the ashes of tragedy, and the future stretched out before them full of promise. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and deep contentment. They expanded the herd, adding 20 more head of cattle, and beginning to establish a reputation for quality stock. Katherine proved to have a gift for keeping accounts, and she took over the ranch's financial records with meticulous attention to detail. Together, they made decisions about the property, true partners in every sense. They weathered difficulties too, as all couples do. There were disagreements about money and priorities, days when the work seemed endless and the rewards distant, nights when old fears surfaced and needed to be soothed away. But they learned to communicate, to compromise, to support each other through the hard times. Their love deepened and matured, becoming something solid and unshakable. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She told Preston on a morning much like the morning they had first arrived at the ranch together, over breakfast in the kitchen that had become the heart of their home. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, watching his face. Preston's expression cycled through shock, joy, and wonder in the space of seconds. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. I saw Dr. Mitchell yesterday when I was in town for supplies. He confirmed it." Preston was around the table in an instant, pulling Katherine into his arms with exquisite gentleness. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "You are happy?" Katherine asked, even though she could see the answer written plainly on his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Preston said, placing a hand over her still flat stomach with reverent care. "You have given me everything, Katherine. A home, a purpose, a love I did not think existed outside of stories, and now this." Katherine covered his hand with her own, linking them together. "We have given these things to each other. I would not be here without you. I would not be whole." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Preston treated Katherine like precious cargo, constantly worried that she was working too hard or lifting too much. She found his protectiveness endearing even when it bordered on excessive. As her belly grew, they prepared a nursery in the smaller bedroom, painting the walls and building a cradle together. Katherine sewed blankets and tiny garments, marveling at how something so small would soon be their child. Their son was born in December, exactly 2 years after the winter auction that had brought them together. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Dr. Mitchell attending and Mrs. Cooper providing support. When Katherine finally held her baby for the first time, when she saw Preston's face as he looked at his son, she understood that she had found her way to something rare and precious. They named him Thomas, after Preston's father, and he was a healthy, robust child with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. Preston was a devoted father from the first moment, handling his son with capable hands that were surprisingly gentle. "He is perfect," Preston whispered, holding Thomas while Katherine rested in the days after the birth. "You are perfect. Thank you for this gift." "Thank you for saving me," Katherine replied, reaching out to touch her husband's face, "for giving me a life worth living." "We saved each other," Preston corrected, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "That is what love does." The years that followed were filled with the organized chaos of family life. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved the ranch and all its animals. When he was 3, Katherine became pregnant again, and this time they welcomed a daughter they named Rose, after the mare who had carried them home on that first day. The Silver Pine Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. They added more acreage, built a larger barn, and hired seasonal help during the busiest times. But the core of everything remained Preston and Katherine, working side by side, raising their children with love and discipline, building a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. Katherine sometimes thought about that winter auction, about the terrified woman she had been, bound and cold and convinced her life was over. She thought about Preston stepping forward, about the choice he had made to intervene when he could have simply walked away. How one decision, one moment of compassion had altered the course of multiple lives. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching their children play in the meadow. Thomas was 7 now, Rose was 4, and Katherine was pregnant with their third child. "The day we met," Katherine said honestly. "How different everything could have been." Preston reached over and took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after 8 years together. But it was not different. It was exactly as it was meant to be. "You really believe that?" "That we were meant to find each other." "I do," Preston said firmly. "I believe some people are meant to cross paths, meant to change each other's lives. We were two broken people who made each other whole. If that is not fate, I do not know what is." Katherine squeezed his hand, watching as Thomas helped Rose climb a tree, his protective instincts already showing. "We made something good here, something lasting." "We made a family," Preston agreed. "We made a home. We made a love that will outlast us both," and they had. By the time their third child, a boy they named Henry, was born, the Silver Pine Ranch was one of the most successful in the area. But more than that, it was a place of love and laughter, where children grew up secure and confident, where hard work was valued but never at the expense of joy. Preston and Katherine grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They welcomed grandchildren in time, taught them the same lessons they had taught their own children about honesty, integrity, and the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Preston and Katherine stood in that same meadow where he had proposed, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Preston, now gray at the temples but still strong and capable, held his wife close. "Thank you," he said quietly, his words meant only for her. "For saying yes, for staying, for loving me." Katherine, her own hair silver and her face lined with the evidence of a life well lived, looked up at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "Thank you for buying my freedom," she said, "and for keeping my heart." "Always," Preston promised, kissing her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "Always and forever." And it was. Their love endured through seasons and challenges, through triumphs and sorrows, through everything that life brought their way. It endured because it was built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership, because they had chosen each other every single day, not just once at an altar, but over and over again in 1,000 small moments. Katherine lived to see her grandchildren marry and have children of their own. She lived to see the Silver Pine Ranch pass into the capable hands of Thomas and his family, knowing that the legacy she and Preston had built would continue for generations. And when she finally passed, at the age of 78, she did so peacefully in her sleep, in the house that had been her sanctuary, in the bed she had shared with Preston for more than 50 years. Preston followed her 6 months later, his heart simply giving out as if it knew that life without Katherine was not really life at all. They were buried side by side on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under pines that whispered in the mountain wind. Their great-grandchildren would eventually tell the story of how they met, romanticizing it perhaps, but never losing the essential truth. That Katherine Wright had been sold like livestock at a winter auction, that Preston Young had bought her freedom, and that, in doing so, he had won her heart. That from tragedy and injustice had come something beautiful and lasting. That love, real love, was the most powerful force in the world, capable of transforming everything it touched. The Silver Pine Ranch stood for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose partnership over power, compassion over cruelty, and love above all else. And if sometimes, on winter evenings when the snow fell soft and silent, people claimed to see two figures walking hand in hand through the meadow, well, that was just another part of the story. A reminder that some loves truly do last forever, transcending even the boundaries of life itself. But that is getting ahead of things, into legend and romance. The real story, the important story, is simpler and yet infinitely complex. It is the story of Katherine, who survived what should have destroyed her and emerged stronger. It is the story of Preston, who saw someone in need and chose to act when others would have looked away. It is the story of two people who found each other against impossible odds and built something that mattered. It is, in the end, a love story. And love stories, when they are true, never really end. They simply transform, becoming part of the fabric of the world, inspiring others to believe that even in the darkest moments, even when all seems lost, there is still hope. There is still the possibility of redemption. There is still the chance that someone will step forward and change everything. That was what Preston did for Katherine on that frozen December day in 1878. And what Katherine did for Preston in return, by showing him that his capacity for compassion could remake not just one life but many, rippling outward in ways neither of them could have imagined standing on that auction platform all those years ago. They lived their lives with intention and grace, with hard work and deep affection, with an awareness that what they had was precious and worth protecting. They raised their children to value character over wealth, relationships over possessions, integrity over ease. They built a ranch that was more than a business, transforming it into a true home where family gathered and memories were made, and love was the currency that mattered most. And in the quiet moments, in the evenings when the work was done, and they sat together watching the sun set over mountains that had witnessed their entire journey, Katherine and Preston would sometimes marvel at the path that had led them to this point. How suffering had transmuted into joy. How desperation had given way to security. How two strangers had become partners, lovers, spouses, parents, and finally, after decades together, two halves of one whole, so thoroughly intertwined that neither could imagine existence without the other. That was the real miracle, the real magic. Not that Preston had paid money to free Katherine from an unjust contract, though that was important. Not that they had built a successful ranch, though that was impressive. The miracle was that they had chosen every single day to love each other well, to communicate honestly, to support each other's dreams, to forgive each other's failings, to grow together instead of apart. Love, they learned, was not just a feeling but a practice. It required effort and intention and commitment. It demanded vulnerability and trust. It asked them to show up day after day, even when they were tired or frustrated or afraid. And the reward for that consistent investment was a relationship that deepened over time rather than fading, that became more precious with each passing year rather than stale or taken for granted. Their children and grandchildren would later say that Preston and Katherine had been blessed, that their love story was exceptional. And in some ways, this was true. But Preston and Katherine knew that their love had not been handed to them as a gift. They had earned it, built it, nurtured it through conscious choice and sustained effort. They had been willing to do the work that true partnership required, and that willingness had made all the difference. So yes, it began with a winter auction where Katherine was sold like livestock. Yes, Preston bought her freedom with money he had saved from years of hard work. But the real story, the one that mattered, was everything that came after. The slow building of trust, the gradual revelation of self to other, the decision to be vulnerable, the choice to commit. The daily practice of loving someone well, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. That was the story worth telling. That was the legacy worth leaving. Not just that they had fallen in love, but that they had stayed in love. That they had built something lasting in a world full of impermanence. That they had created a sanctuary for themselves and their children in a place that had once seemed hostile and foreign. The Silver Pine Ranch became known throughout Colorado not just for its quality cattle, but for something harder to define, something people felt when they visited. A sense of permanence and stability, an atmosphere of genuine welcome. The feeling that this was a place where people valued what truly mattered, where the priorities were right, where love and family and honest work took precedence over the scramble for wealth or status that consumed so many. People would come seeking to buy cattle and leave having received something more valuable, though they could not always name it. They had seen what a good marriage looked like. They had witnessed what could be built when two people worked together toward common goals. They had felt, however briefly, what it was like to be in a space where love was the foundation of everything. And years later, decades later, when people told the story of Preston and Katherine Young, they always came back to that central truth. That love had been the transforming force. Not money, though Preston's wealth had grown. Not status, though they had earned respect throughout the territory. Not even the beautiful ranch or the successful children or any of the other outward markers of a life well lived. It was the love that mattered. The love that had started with one man's decision to intervene, to spend his money not on another acre of land or a better horse, but on freeing someone who needed help. The love that had grown from that single seed into something vast and sustaining, something that fed not just two people but an entire family, an entire legacy. When Katherine was an old woman, rocking on the porch with her great-grandchildren at her feet, she would sometimes tell them about that day at the auction. She did not spare them the harsh realities of what happened to women who fell into debt slavery, did not pretend it was anything other than what it was. A profound injustice, a cruelty dressed up in legal language, but she also told them about what came after, about Preston's kindness, about the year of learning and growing, about the love that had saved her in ways that had nothing to do with contracts or money and everything to do with being seen, being valued, being loved for exactly who she was. Never underestimate what one person can do, she would tell those children, her gnarled hands resting on the porch railing that Preston had built with his own hands decades earlier. Your great-grandfather could have walked past that auction. He could have told himself it was not his problem. But he did not. He acted. And that single action changed everything, not just for me, but for all of you. Every person sitting here exists because Preston chose compassion over indifference. Remember that. Remember that your choices matter, that you have the power to change lives, that love and courage can transform the world. And they did remember. The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Preston and Katherine Young carried that lesson forward, lived it out in their own ways. Some became advocates for those caught in unjust systems. Some simply practiced daily kindness, making their corner of the world a little better through small, consistent actions. All of them understood that they were part of a legacy that began with love and was sustained by it. The story came full circle in ways both profound and simple. A woman sold into servitude was freed by a compassionate man. That woman and that man fell in love and built a life together. They raised children who honored their example. Those children raised their own families with the same values. And on, rippling forward through time, a testament to what could be built on a foundation of genuine love and mutual respect. In the end, that was the happy ending Katherine and Preston had earned. Not just that they lived long lives or built a successful ranch, or even that they stayed happily married for 53 years. The happy ending was in the totality of what they had created together. A home, a family, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. When people asked Katherine in those final years what the secret was to their long and happy marriage, she always gave the same answer. We chose each other, not just once but every day. And we made that choice not because it was easy, but because we knew it was the most important choice we would ever make. That was the truth at the heart of their story. That love was a choice, made again and again, in moments large and small. The choice to be kind when anger would be easier. The choice to communicate when silence would be simpler. The choice to forgive when holding a grudge would feel more justified. The choice to stay when leaving would be less complicated. Preston and Katherine made those choices together, for decades, creating something beautiful in the process. They proved that it was possible to build lasting love on a foundation of mutual respect, that two people could be equals and partners, that marriage could be a source of joy rather than obligation. And that, ultimately, was why their story endured. Not because it was unusual for a man to buy a woman's freedom, though that was part of it. Not because they beat the odds and built a successful life, though that mattered too. Their story endured because it was a testament to the transforming power of love when it was practiced with intention and grace. They had loved each other well. They had loved their children well. They had loved the land and the animals and the life they had built together. And that love had been enough, more than enough. It had been everything. As the sun set over the Silver Pine Ranch on the day Katherine was laid to rest beside her husband, their family gathered in the meadow where fireflies danced, just as they had on the night of Preston's proposal all those years ago. 3 generations stood together, united in grief, but also in gratitude for the example they had been given, for the love they had witnessed, for the legacy they would carry forward. Thomas, now an old man himself, spoke words his father had once said. Some people are meant to cross paths, meant to change each other's lives. My parents were 2 broken people who made each other whole. They built something here that will last long after all of us are gone. Not just a ranch, but a reminder that love matters, that choosing kindness matters, that one person really can change everything. And as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, the family lingered, reluctant to leave this place that held so many memories. This meadow where Preston had proposed, this land they had worked together, this home they had built from nothing but love and determination and faith in each other. The story of Katherine and Preston Young became part of Colorado lore, told and retold with each generation. Some details were lost, others embellished, but the core remained true. A winter auction, a cowboy with a conscience, a woman given a second chance, and a love that transcended everything, proving that even from the darkest circumstances, beauty could bloom. That was their happy ending, earned through years of dedication, secured through consistent choice, validated by the family and legacy they left behind. They had taken the worst day of Katherine's life and transformed it into the beginning of something magnificent. They had proven that redemption was possible, that love could overcome injustice, that 2 people working together could accomplish more than either could alone. And somewhere, in the wind that whispered through the pines, in the meadow where fireflies still danced on summer nights, in the ranch house that stood solid and welcoming, their love endured. Not as ghosts or spirits, but as something more fundamental. As an example, as an inspiration. As proof that true love, when it is honored and nurtured and chosen every single day, really can last forever. The end, but also the beginning, because love like theirs never truly ends. It simply transforms, becoming part of the world itself, shaping everyone it touches, rippling forward through time in ways both seen and unseen. That was the final gift of Katherine and Preston Young. The knowledge that love, real love, is the most powerful force in existence, capable of redeeming the past, transforming the present, and securing the future.